The True Ambition podcast with John Zink is brought to you by IT Avalon. IT Avalon, IT staffing and professional services done right. Visit our sponsor at itavalon.com. Now, welcome to True Ambition.
Welcome to the True Ambition podcast. I'm your host, John Zink, and I'm sitting here today with a good friend of mine, and his name is Steven Salaets. This is episode 2001. So Steven is just total transparency. He's also not just the CIO, CPO, and EVP of Global Security, Facilities, and Internal Audit at Rimini Street. He's also one of my best friends, and he lives right down the street from me. So he's been at Rimini Street for almost 12 years. He's got a wife named Christy. He's got 2 kids, Sadie and Nate, and a dog named Fifi.
That's correct.
So first of all, welcome and thank you so much for doing this. Full transparency to everybody, this is our first ever podcast of the True Ambition podcast, so bear with us. Now, first thing I want to talk about is the pinball machine that's at your house.
Okay.
So we'll talk about it later, but you're a big Metallica fan.
Yeah.
And Ed, he's got this amazing pinball machine. It's a Metallica pinball machine. Go ahead and tell people about that pinball machine. And what I really want to find out is who's got the highest score in that pinball machine.
Well, thanks for having me, John. I didn't know that this was going to be the line of questioning.
It's the first question.
Yeah, so I got this fantastic pinball machine. Actually, quite interesting fact, it's one of the top 10 best pinball machines ever made. Some other ones in there are the Addams Family, Iron Maiden is another one. Yeah, so I got this wonderful good friend that came over to my house, claimed he never played the pinball machine, and he's like playing, it's like, hey, what does this do? What does that do? Next thing I know, he makes 150 million high score on there, and I think my high score is, 70 million?
And I don't know, but I know that whoever put it must be an amazing pinball player. So I went over to your house and started playing it, and we were playing. He's got an amazing room that has a pool table, dartboard, and pinball machine. It's one of the coolest pinball machines ever. Mm-hmm. And you're sitting there playing, and it's playing like all your favorite Metallica songs on it.
It does.
And it's got multi-ball going. There's balls flying all over the place, and I ended up with this huge score. And he's never let me live it down since.
No. And I've been trying to play it off ever since, and I just cannot beat the score, man.
Well, hopefully one of these days you will, because then you'll come back and rub it in my face. So,
I will. Speaking
of Metallica, you went to, and I just saw it on your Facebook page the other day, you were like in the front row for Metallica. Mm-hmm. Tell people about the Metallica Iron Maiden story, because I love this story. Uh-huh. I'm a huge music fan. We'll talk more about that in a second, but this is one of my favorite stories. Tell them about the concert.
Actually, the Facebook post you saw was the year before.
Oh, okay.
It happened twice in a row, but well, not the Iron Maiden experience, but basically what happened is this was last year when Metallica was doing their 20-year anniversary for the S&M, which was with the Symphony of San Francisco.
All right.
And so I do a lot of business with Salesforce, and they invited me to come over to the Chase Center. We just opened the same day. And so we go there and we show up, and as we're hanging out in the back lounge, waiting for the show to start, I'm hanging out with the COO from Salesforce, and we're just chatting. The guy's French, and we're just having a little bit of a connection there going and a little bit talking. I'm meeting his son. Next thing I know, 2 gentlemen walk in, and they show up in rock t-shirts, and I'm like looking over, and the guy's like, oh, that's management of Iron Maiden. And I'm like, okay, management Iron Maiden, how do you know them? And they're like, oh, they're using Salesforce. I'm like, for what? So their whole online platform that they use for engaging with fans is all based on Salesforce. I had no idea. And so I start talking to these guys. They're obviously from the UK. So they're like, hey, what's your accent? So I'm like, hey, I'm Belgian. So we start talking a little bit. Next thing I know, we're sipping fine Metallica whiskey. I don't know if you know this, but Metallica has a really fantastic whiskey called Blackens. And so we're drinking the whiskey, and we're eating sushi and cold flaked s'mores, and I'm sitting here, man, this is a Metallica concert. What the heck?
Yeah.
Last time I went.
How much things have changed?
Yeah, right. So anyway, so I walk up to the bar together with the guy from Iron Maiden, at this point, I'm not quite sure what he does. But we're ordering Metallica beer, and it's the name is it's called Enter Night. And we're ordering the beer, we're drinking it, and he's like, this is not bad. I'm like, how does it compare to your Trooper beer? And he's like, well, there's really only one way to find this out. He's like, what are you doing tomorrow night? I'm like, I don't know. He's like, well, we're playing down in Sacramento. Do you want to head over there and maybe you can try it? I'm like, hell yeah. So I pull out my business card. being a big Iron Maiden fan, I'm like, there's no second thinking.
Oh, yeah.
So I pull out my business cards. I give him the business cards. I don't really think a lot is going to happen out of this. So I go to work. The day after, I'm doing my thing. Suddenly around noon, I get this email that says, you are on the Iron Maiden guest list. I'm like, holy crap. Right. I call my admin. I'm like, cancel my day. I'm out. Call my brother-in-law. I'm like, hey, man, what you doing? He's like, oh, I'm working. I'm like, well, whatever you're doing is not as important as this. We're going to Iron Maiden. He's like, what? So we drive over to Sacramento. I walk up to the will call window. And at this point, I have no clue really what I have, right? So I'm just like, okay, we're just going to a concert, right? So I walk up to the will call window. The lady's like, okay, give me your ID. She's looking at my ID. She's like looking through the boxes. She's like, can't find you, honey. Where'd you buy your ticket? I'm like, well, I didn't really buy it. I got this invite. And she's looking and she's like, oh. And so she goes to this different box. She pulls out. She's like, here you go. She's like, go down the escalator, go down the hallway to the right. You can't miss it. So I go down the escalator. I go to the right. I go towards the curtain. The security guy looks at my badge. He's like, yep. I walk through there, long hallway. I'm like talking to Andre and my brother-in-law. I'm like, man, this is pretty legit. So we all walk all the way to the end. It suddenly says Iron Maiden dressing room. And there's a security guard sitting there. He looks at our badge and he's like, yep. We walk in there. There's the whole Iron Maiden crew, a whole bunch of fans, and they're all sitting there just hanging out.
So you're sitting there with Bruce Dickinson?
Yep.
Oh my God.
We're just sitting there hanging out for like an hour and a half. Right before they have to go on stage, they're like, all right, we're going to get ready. See you guys later. By the way, tomorrow morning, tour bus leaves at 9:30 in front of this hotel. I'm like, oh. You know, like, should I?
Yeah, you're going on tour.
Yes. I'm like, that sounds like an invite to me, right? But full transparency, didn't do that. But then we basically went to the show. It was a fantastic show. It was amazing.
So the question is, what's better, the Trooper or the Metallica beer?
I like both. They both have a very different taste. I know you don't drink, otherwise I would say, come check it out in my house. I have both. But they have different tastes. And Trooper has a few variations, where the Metallica beer is really only one beer.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. Now, you and I went to Las Vegas to a Tool concert. So I'm a huge Tool fan. I know you are as well. Mm-hmm. And there was something happened that night where it was before the concert, and you and I are cruising around. We played some blackjack. We both lost a few $100s. And I'm walking back. I'm like, let's go play this Buffalo machine. And I walk over, and there's these 2 yellow chips on the floor. And I reach down, I grab them real quick, and walk away. I'm like, come here. All right, so we head over to the bathroom.
And if I may pause him for a second here. What was really interesting is, at this point, we had hung out a handful of times, right? This is like our first getaway. And I don't know what's happening, besides the fact that you suddenly say, hey, let's go to the bathroom. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, what for?
Exactly.
Like, I always like to go to the bathroom with other men, right? So we go in there. I'm like, dude, check this out. I just found 2 $1,000 chips on the floor.
It was amazing.
And then you said, do not give them back. No, I'm just kidding. So we ended up, went to the Tool concert. It was amazing. Mm-hmm. And then got back, and we ended up both leaving even because of, you know, some person lost a couple $1,000 chips on the floor, and I'm like, all right, here we go. And it was awesome. It was one of the greatest experiences. You and I got close to that trip too. It was awesome.
That was an amazing trip. And I thought what was really great is, like, I know you find those chips, obviously there's no name on them, so we couldn't really give them back to anybody. What I thought was really nice is, like, I know that you were tipping people from the casino very, very nice as a result of that, and that was fantastic.
Oh, it was awesome. It was money that wasn't meant for us, and nobody else was going to get back, so why not take care of everybody, including ourselves?
Yes, exactly, which I appreciate as well.
So I got some information here And, the name of this podcast is True Ambition. Mm-hmm. And anybody who knows my past knows, and you know well as a friend of mine, I've been in recovery for about 6.5 years from alcohol addiction. And one of my favorite quotes in one of the books is, true ambition is not what we thought it was. Mm-hmm. True ambition is the profound desire to live usefully and walk humbly under the grace of God. Mm-hmm. Once I read that quote, it kind of changed my life, because I've always been ambitious myself. And looking back on my life, I think some of my ambitions were mostly just for my own desire to get ahead, to gain power, to get money, to get girls, whatever it was, depending on that point in my life. So what I wanted to do with putting this podcast together is talk to other successful people and find out about their true ambitions. Mm-hmm. So some of the information you gave me, it's really funny because all of our lives kind of intertwine, and we have so many things in common. So one of the things you talked about was your dad leaving mm-hmm. when you were younger. How old were you?
It's interesting. My parents divorced when I was 2 years old.
Okay.
They never told me this, and they were living together. They were fighting every single day. And then when I did my first communion, which is when you were about 6, mm-hmm. We went for dinner or for lunch, at which they were fighting. And we came home. He packed a suitcase and left, and I was like, "What's going on?" And the message was, "We're divorcing, and your dad is leaving." Blew my mind.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something else, because same thing. I didn't find out until I was like 20 years old that my dad who raised me wasn't my dad.
Exactly.
Boom.
Yeah.
Your mind is just like, okay, what do I do with this?
Yeah.
Now, you also said in some of the information you gave me that you dealt with some family addiction issues. Mm-hmm. I think you said in there your mom.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it was interesting. So I never realized, as a kid, you don't really realize this, right? So I always knew that my mom was taking medication, which was Xanax, but I never really realized what that meant, what that was for, or how much you should be taking of that or anything like that, right? Until suddenly you get older and you realize that there is quite some dependency there on that medication, and almost like it seems like what I kind of started realizing is like she's not functioning unless she's taking this, right? Mm-hmm. And then what happened is she.
Do you know how old you were when you realized that was going on? This interesting. You have how old's Nate?
Nate is 13 years old.
Okay, 13, mm-hmm. and I have Johnny, who is 2 years old. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder about, when they realize, and maybe we can go back in our history and figure out when we kind of realize that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would think definitely around 12, 13, you kind of start connecting the dots, right? You're hearing a lot more about it at school. So you kind of start realizing that maybe that is not normal. What also happened is, though, around the age I was 12, my mom's second husband became an alcoholic. Mm. He wasn't before. He was more a social drinker, and suddenly that social drinking shifted into a full-blown alcoholic. And I was very aware of that, right? And that went on for about 5 years, and then my mom became an alcoholic as well. Mm. She left him and then became an alcoholic, which was strange, but it's kind of hard to say where exactly do you realize this.
Yeah. Well, it's all tough along the way, and it's like me being a recovering alcoholic. You just don't. Nobody plans on being there, but nobody plans on ending up where we all end up, and nobody plans on mistreating their kids or doing their kids wrong or nothing like that. But all of a sudden, you just find yourself there. Yeah. It's like your stepfather or whatever he was. Started off as a social drinker, and then it just all of a sudden it ends up at that tipping point where you just go over the edge.
Exactly. Let me ask you, like, as a recovering alcoholic, do you realize when you became an alcoholic? Is there like a point? Well, do you realize when? And at some point, how long did it take actually for you to really understand that?
It's interesting because, like, right now I'm writing a book, which is also called True Ambition, and I'm going through all of this history. And when I first got sober, I thought I was a pretty decent guy. Mm-hmm. And then you start looking back on things and realizing how selfish you are as a practicing alcoholic, when you're out there drinking. And I look back on things where I didn't think I was that bad. but I was in my early 20s doing things like I'd be playing in a band and I'd pass out on stage behind a speaker. That's a problem. You're in the middle of what you do and passing out behind a speaker, giving no care at all towards the other band members that are on stage. And then another time later in my 20s or early 30s, I was in Minneapolis, and same thing, got drunk and I passed out under a drum riser, and that band broke up the next day. I wonder why. It's just, when it really started affecting me was mid to late 30s. Right around my 40th birthday is when things started really affecting me a lot as far as my health. I always say thank God for hangovers, because if it wasn't for hangovers, I don't even know if I would have got sober. It's just all of a sudden that pain takes over, and then I knew I had to do something. Before that, it was just, let's go out and get rid of all of the bad thoughts in my head, about childhood, about some of the things that happened to me that I didn't have any control over. And then you just start drinking or, doing drugs or whatever people do to try to silence those voices in your head and try to make yourself feel better. So, wow. One of the other things I read on here is that, you're the CIO of Rimini Street, and you got a couple other titles as well, but you weren't a good student. We're not a good student at school.
Not at all.
Me neither. I was horrible. So tell me a little bit about that. What was your problem?
It's interesting because I've always, as a kid, I was always a dreamer. Like I would sit in the classroom, and it's kind of scary because I see the same with Nate, my son.
Yeah.
And I could dream for hours, like anything, right? And when I was not in school, I would always be tinkering with things. I would be taking things apart. Like, this microphone, I would be taking it apart, see how it works, right? Try to build something out of it. So I was always I was also very fascinated by computers. So technology, science, all that stuff, right? So my school was just never where it had to be. I wasn't paying attention in class. My grades were really bad. In fact, I was held back twice. It came to the point where, because education is really important in Belgium, where I'm from, and if you don't have a degree, you're being treated very different. So it's very siloed based on your education. And so it was very important for my mom for me to have a degree. So it was actually that bad that she's like, well, let's see if he's intellectually there. Let's have him do an IQ test, which backfired because it showed that actually my IQ was really high. It was in the 130s, which is up there. And as a result, she was only more frustrated with me for not accomplishing anything in school.
So it backfired on you because you're like, oh, now I got to work because it shows that I'm smart.
No, well, actually, it wasn't getting better, right?
Right. Well, it's probably all the issues that were going on in your home.
Yeah.
It's like there's so many kids that are super smart out there. And when you have that stuff going on at home, that's, there's no way you can be happy in that situation. The last thing you want to do is go prove how smart you are.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. Or most people, that I don't want to go to school and do a bunch of work when my whole home life is not showing me any future at all.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is I always had I have ADHD. So my attention span is so short, it's not even funny, right? So that didn't help me either, especially in school. I feel like I have it better under control as I got older, but when I was a kid, that's also why I could walk out of the classroom and have no clue what we just talked about for the last hour kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm very much that way too. I don't know about the ADHD. I'm pretty level, but I have to be doing things all the time. I was always dreaming. I'm a musician, and when I was in band and choir and things that interested me, always, top of my game. When I was in other classes that I didn't care about, I literally, my junior and senior year of high school, I had to beg my history teacher to pass me so I could get out. I'm like, you don't want me back. I don't want to come back. Let's figure this out, right? Yeah. But it just goes to show, you don't have to have that education. You got to have that drive. Yeah. And there's so many stories of entrepreneurial type thinkers that can't even think about, going to school and doing all that kind of stuff. when you're in those situations. You kind of have to work your way out of it and figure your way out of it and think your way out of it. So now you said that you not only were a dreamer, but you also felt misunderstood.
I oftentimes felt misunderstood because my grades were not good.
So you knew you were smart.
I'm not sure, but I
So did people tell you that you weren't smart?
Yes. So.
And you knew that wasn't right.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. So basically, as I was growing up, a lot people knew I didn't have good grades. People knew that I was outside on the streets playing, getting in trouble, as a kid does. But because I wasn't getting good grades, and because education was so important, or is so important in Belgium, a lot of parents would tell me like, stay away from my son. Or the son would say, hey, my parents don't want me to hang out with you because you're not a good kid. I'm like, wow, okay, what does that mean, right? So that would be hurtful, right? Like one time I remember going to somebody's house and the kid goes like, hey, my parents are calling me and I'll be back in a little bit. I'm literally standing out there for like half an hour, 45 minutes. And the kid comes out and he says like, my dad wants you to leave. And I'm like, wow, okay, what did I do?
Right.
It's like, I didn't do anything. So that was hard, and I had a lot of those experiences. And then at the same time, my parents, like I said, were very frustrated. So they kept telling me like, you're gonna get nowhere. Like I remember one time my dad, I must have been like 16 or 17, and my dad said, why don't you just go get a job? At least you'll make money. It's not like that school stuff is gonna happen for you. So why don't you just go work?
Right.
I'm like, wow, like I know I can do better. Like why would I do that? That's like, I was never taught it, you know what I mean? Like that's why I felt very misunderstood.
Yeah, I can totally relate because like my mom and dad in Illinois both worked in factories. That's what they knew, right? And my mother retired from a factory job after 35 years. Her plan for me, because I didn't go to college, I went to one day of college. I knew I was done after that. I literally left. Yeah. I went for one class and I left out of there. She said, well, go get a job at LK, which is this manufacturing company where she worked at. And she retired there after 35 years. Great living. All she really wanted to do was have a great job so she could provide for her son and her family. And she retired doing that, and she did a great job. I just couldn't. I went and worked at that LK manufacturing for one summer. And I think I was on the assembly line, and I think I was putting a box over top of a water cooler, which is what they manufactured. And I was just hoping and praying that I can move up the line and I could run the drill to put a screw into the side of the thing, just so I could change it up a little bit. And I knew from that time, like, I need to get out of here.
Yeah.
One of the things I was going to talk about here is you had a restaurant job. So did I. Tell me about your experience and what you learned from that restaurant job.
Well, for me, that was actually around the time I was 16, and it started as a summer job. So I went to work there July, August, and from there I kept working every Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday. So I kept working there during school time. It was hard work. It was not an 8-hour gig. It was pretty much 12, 13 hours. And I feel what I learned there is definitely like, you kind of work hard, play hard. Kind of looking back at those times, right? Like, it's like, there was also like, I knew that it's not what I wanted. It's like, just kind of like what you're saying about the factory line, right? I knew that was not what I wanted. It was hard work. It was not easy. I was doing dishes. So you're sitting in the back room doing dishes. It's like 100 freaking degrees in there for like 13 hours straight, right? And if I was lucky, it's kind of funny that you say that about this crew, because when I was lucky, they would say, hey, can you go peel potatoes? I was like, hell yes. Best day ever. Like, right? And then I would sit there and like literally peel like 100 kilograms of potatoes.
With a huge smile on your face?
Yes, exactly. Like my fingers would be cut up. I'm like, oh, this is a great day.
Yes.
Right? So it's like, I knew I didn't want that, but I think what I learned there is to work hard.
Me too. That's exactly. I worked at there was a small restaurant in a small town. It was one of the best known restaurants in town. It was called Siebert's, and it was pizzas and steaks and all this kind of stuff. And what I got out of there was the same thing. I washed dishes. That's where I started. And hard work, long hours. You know, you get there at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon and maybe get off at 2 o'clock in the morning after a big long night.
Yeah.
And but Bob Sievert was the guy's name who owned the place, and we used to sit down there at the end of the night after you're all done, and I would sit there and eat a pizza. Love pizza, and I would ask Bob, I'm like, you have one of the most successful restaurants in town. How do you do it? And he sat there and he would tell me, you know, this is how I did it. Because it was in business for like 40 years, right? And he said, one of the main things that I do as a restaurant owner is I never ever drink in my own establishment. He goes, I'll go and have a drink at one of the other establishments around there, and then I'll buy a drink for somebody over there or something. I'll never drink in my own establishment. And I learned so much from that. I didn't follow it all the time, but it was interesting to listen to him and just learn how to work hard. And I also baled hay as a kid and stuff like that. And learned how to really work hard in the Midwest, which it sounds like you did too. But just learning something from every situation that we were in.
When I'm looking back at this, as I'm thinking more about those days, like I said, as I ended, I learned to work hard. And if I think about it, because you couldn't slack off. You're doing the dishes, and when you slack off, dishes are piling up.
Oh yeah.
And the chef from the kitchen will be on your case, man. Like, he would be so upset about it. There's nothing to do. I mean, you had to just get it. So you couldn't slack off, right? So it's like 12, 13 hours, boom, boom, boom. Funny fact, it was an Italian restaurant, since you were doing pizza.
Oh yeah.
So same here.
I always worked at places I wanted to eat the food.
Oh, me too, man. Yeah, and Thursday night, that's probably why I was working Thursday night, because Thursday night was pizza night. It was once a week, and then it was other Italian cuisine for the rest.
Yeah. Well, now, one of the things I was looking at here is you've always had that entrepreneurial mindset. You said you were selling plants. What kind of plants?
Well, that was kind of interesting. So I was always kind of looking for business ideas. And so there was this abandoned place not too far from my house. And we would, like I said earlier, always playing outside, right? We had like a group of like 3-4 people that were always like on our bikes. We were always wearing like rain boots, always going around the neighborhoods. And so anyway, so we would oftentimes go by this house that was abandoned, but it had like a lot of land on it, and it had like fantastic plants. And so me thinking, it's like, wow, there's like thousands of plants in the backyard, and it was planted as a nursery. It was not planted as a garden, right? I'm like, wow, this is abandoned. There's all these plants. I can sell these things, right?
Right.
So I start taking them out, putting in nice pots, and going from house to house. I'm like, hey, do you want to buy a plant? Next thing I know, like, people are like, oh yeah, of course. Next thing I know, I'm starting to make some money. So one of the kids I was hanging out with, his dad goes to me, he's like, Steven, these plants are really nice. Where do you get these plants? And I'm like, oh, down the street. and he goes like, oh. He's like, that's a problem. He's like, we gotta go talk to your mom about this. I'm like, oh shit. So I had to go back to everybody's house, get all those plants back.
Oh, so you lost all the money?
Yes. And plant them back. But yeah, that was my first business venture. I obviously didn't make it big, but you kind of learn about how to kind of market your product. You kind of make some, and I've always had that. I would try to build PCs.
Well, that was one of the questions on here. Tell me about BBS, which stands for Bulletin Board System.
That was a great time. So yes, that's like before you had the internet. Before you had the internet, we had basically dial-up bulletin board systems. So basically, what you would have is a bunch of servers, and there would be phone lines tied into this, and you could call in there. You could download files. You could share files. You could talk to other people. You could quote unquote email. It wasn't email, but something like email. So you could message people.
And what year was that?
Oh, this was 97, 98.
Okay.
Right. Maybe 96 even. It was
right at the beginning.
Yes. And it's actually interesting because when I was doing that, so I was running this whole farm that I had kind of built together with recycled computers and this and that. And I had convinced to get the phone, I had a phone line from my own. I had my mom convinced that I could take the house phone line from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. So I had multiple phone lines tied into this. And I needed more, so I needed to get a job. So I started calling around. I started calling computer companies, computer stores. Back in the day, a lot of small mom and pop shops where you could like basically get your computer fixed. You could buy computers. So I started calling all these guys, basically cold calling, and maybe after 15, 20 calls, this guy says, "Oh, that sounds interesting. Why don't you come to my shop and let's talk about this?" So this guy has a shop in Antwerp. I walk into the store and he's like walking up and he's like, "Oh, hey, nice meeting you, this and that." He's like, "Come back." And he's like soldering a motherboard of a computer. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, "Dude, you're burning the chips of this motherboard. You can't be doing this, right?" I'm like, his name was Tom. And I was like, "Tom, you got to stop doing this, man. You're burning this." He's like, I'm like, "You got to this, and this." And he's like, "Oh, seems like you know what you're talking about. Do you want to do it?" I'm like, "Sure." So I'm doing this. I'm fixing the computer. And while I'm doing it, he's telling me, he's like, "Yeah, this is for a customer. This is running all this Access database stuff that he's built over the years, and we need to get this back. And if I can save this computer, it would be tremendous, this and that, right?" So I finished this, and he's like, "All right, let's now talk about your bulletin board system." And I'm like, "Okay, well, I would like to get a few more computers, and I need to get some income so that I can buy more phone lines. In return, I will advertise." And I had maybe like a few thousand callers a month. So it was not great volume, but it was also not small. And so he said, "Okay, we can do this, this, and this." And then he's like, "By the way, since you know all this stuff about computers, why don't you come work here?" And that was actually a very big shift for me. When I started working there, start building computers, and also start building networks at his customers' offices, that's when I really realized that computers were my true passion. Before that, it was always kind of tinkering in my garage or my basement. And I was like,
just because you put all the pieces together on how it works for society?
Yep.
Okay.
And that's when I realized I have to get out of school as fast as I can. And then I have to go to college and get that done. And then I have to go off.
So all of a sudden you had the motivation and you could see the big picture?
Once I found the passion, once I found the motivation, once I had the passion and I was like, yes. And the validation that I actually was good at it and knew what I was doing, from there it was a piece of cake.
Yeah. That's awesome. So that local computer store job, that's what you're just talking about?
Mm-hmm.
The first corporate gig, I was reading it, you had some balls.
Mm-hmm.
So you told the CIO in like the second week you were there that he should rebuild the whole network. Tell me how that came about. And tell me how you had the chutzpah to step up and say that on your second week there.
You see, and I've never been a shy person. So, and that's always been like that.
I know that about you.
And maybe that's also why I felt so misunderstood and why maybe in school things were not easy, because even in school, I would be like questioning teachers.
Right.
I'm like, why are we doing this? And it'd be like, because I'm telling you to do it. And I'm like, well, that's not a good answer.
Right.
And it's like, Stephen, get out of the classroom, right?
Yeah.
Like,
go to the principal's office.
I'm like, oh man. So anyway, so I take this job. So what had happened is, right before that, I was there during my Easter break, and I did an Easter break job there in the IT department, and that happened through my ex-girlfriend's dad. He got me a job there just to help the help desk. So after that, the CIO tells me, he's like, "Hey man, you're doing a pretty good job. If you graduate from high school, I will give you a job on the help desk." And he gives me a contract, and I'm like thinking to myself, I'm like, okay. And as I'm signing it, it's like, I do not want to do a help desk. That is not what I want to be doing.
Right.
But I'll sign this and then we'll see from there. Right? Super cool. So I get this job, pays like $1,000 a month. I'm like, yes. And so I'm there. And as I'm sitting there in my first week and I'm looking around at the infrastructure, and they were using something called Wang Systems, which is a very old mainframe, and AS400. And that's what they're using. And everybody on their desk has like a green terminal. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, and now the internet is out, right? There's websites, there's email, there's all that stuff out there. And then they have all these Reuters platforms that they're using, because basically the company was trading in non-ferro metals, copper. So they had a big manufacturing plant, and then they were also trading. They were buying, selling constantly. And so in order to email, they had one computer per department that had email. It's like, it's ridiculous, right?
Right.
So I'm sitting there, I'm like, what are we doing here, right? And I had set up all these servers at the computer store. And so I'm sitting there, I'm like, this doesn't make no sense. So I opened PowerPoint, I started jotting things down, and I walked into his office on the second week, and I'm like, man, you guys got to make a leap. It's funny, today we talk about digital transformation, but right. I'm like, you got to make a leap. You got to get away from these green terminals, and you got to go to NT4, Exchange 5.5. You got to get a web server up and running. And if we do all this, what will happen is every trader will have email on their desk that they can use to email outside parties or internal parties. They can do price checks on Reuters on their desktop. They can do all these things. And he's like,
and production will go through the roof.
Yes. He's like, wow, that's crazy. He goes like, can you go to the CFO office with me? So I go into the CFO office with him, and I'm like doing the same spiel. And they're both sitting there like, oh my God, how do we do this? I'm like, I'll build it for you. And I had never done this before.
I bet the rest of the employees loved you.
Oh man, I was on everybody's shit list. It was crazy. Like I would literally have like this one guy walks up to me, had been there for like 20 years. And he's like, Steven, in my first job, I changed printer toners for the first 5 years. And I looked at him and I'm like, I'm so sorry for you, man. Like,
sucks to be you.
I'm like, what does that have to do with the fact that we're doing this, right?
No, that's the thinking that keeps people down. It's the thinking that, wait a second, kid.
Yeah.
I did this for 5 years, and now you come in here with a great idea.
Yeah.
And thank God you did that. Mm-hmm. I always talk to people about, what was that moment that changed your life? That sounds like one of those transformational moments where everything just changed for you because you're willing to go outside of your comfort zone, or maybe it is your comfort zone, just to go out there and go, hey. But thank God you did it.
Well, I don't mind calling things out. I think
it's
that's
the truth.
Exactly, and that's also I think where I got to be. It's like you don't have to accept status quo. You know what I mean? Like, and it's like you gotta always think forward. You gotta keep improving. You gotta keep moving forward. And I'm sitting there. I'm like, I know all this stuff exists, and this company doesn't have this. And while I wasn't connecting all the business dots, it was very clear to me, if these people have this, then this is what the impact is to their employees, to their traders. This is, and even in the factory, because in the factory, they're all sitting there on green terminals. I mean, this makes no sense to me. Like you guys are like 20 years behind.
Yeah. Step up and do it.
Yeah.
So you and I talked about it a long time ago, but you lived in Paris. Mm-hmm. How long were you there for? And what took you there?
My job. So when I went to my second job, I did that at the company was called Metallica, and so I worked there. I did that whole transformation, and after I was done, they kind of told me and they said, you know what? Thank you so much. So now what I did is I traveled all over Europe. I integrated all their remote warehouses because they have all these warehouses where they would have all the materials that they're buying show up, and then they would trade them or they would bring them to the manufacturing plants, right? So I connected all of these with frame relay networks back in the day. And so connected everything. And they said, you know what, this is amazing, Steven. They gave me a nice raise and they wanted me to stay, but I knew that I was not going to be doing anything that awesome for a long time. Mm-hmm. So I decided to go look for another job. So I went to work for a company called Ionic. And this actually the same happened in that.
And that
job.
was in Paris as well?
No, that was in Belgium.
In Belgium.
And that was a job where basically, that was my second job. So at this point I had like 2 or 3 years of experience.
Okay.
I'm interviewing with these guys. I walk in there and the guy's like, here's a Microsoft certified systems engineer test. Complete this. I'm okay. Completing it. He comes get the paper, he walks away and he's like, you did really well on this test. So let's talk. He's like, I was concerned because you don't have a degree. At the meantime, I was pursuing a degree, but I hadn't finished yet, right? So he's like, you don't have a degree, but let's talk because you did really good. So he's talking to me. He calls in his COO. The COO comes in. They're both talking to me. And they're sitting there, and I can tell there is hesitation. I'm like, hey, man, I can tell there is hesitation. I understand. 2 years of experience, no degree. You're taking quite a bit of risk because the guy that was hiring me, I was replacing the IT manager. The IT manager was moving to Canada. And so I was going to take this thing over, right? And so basically, I said, why don't we do this? I'll take 2 weeks of time off at my current job, and I'll work here for free. If you like what I'm doing, you hire me. If you don't like it, I'll just go my own way. I said, okay, we'll do that. So I worked there for 2 weeks, done deal. Took the job. 9 months later, we sold the company to a company in America called Wind River Systems. And this was just around...
What year was that Wind River bought out that company?
So this must have been around 2000, because what happened is in 2001, when the .com bubble bursted, that's when we had to close that operation.
Okay.
And that's when I was given the option to move either to the UK or to Germany. And I said, well, don't want to move to the UK because the office is in Swindon, which is literally in the middle of nowhere.
Okay.
I'm like, I'm young, I'm not going to live there. And I'm not so keen on going to live in Germany. But you know what? I would love to move to California. And they're like, well, that's not going to happen. We're trying to save money. We're not going to be able to relocate you to California. I'm like, okay, what about Paris? And they're like, well, in Paris, we're trying to get the headcount down under 50 people because of unions and all that. So I'm like, okay, well. So I kind of held my ground, and they had my severance package calculated and everything. And Christmas Eve, my boss calls me and he's like, dude, you're still interested in moving to Paris? I'm like, sure. He's like, January 1st, it's a done deal.
Merry Christmas.
I'm like, what? I thought December 31st was my last day, right? So I was like, wow, okay, I'll be there January 1st, deal. So I did that, lived there for about 3 years. I'm finally answering your question. So I lived there for 3 years, and then I moved to the United States.
Awesome. So 2003-ish you moved to the US?
It was more like, it must have been 2004 when I moved to the United States.
So had you been to the US before?
I started coming to the US when I moved to Paris. Interestingly enough, my job changed a lot. From being the sysadmin guy running the Belgian office, I became responsible for all of Europe. And that came about because I saw similar problems, right? What had happened with Wind River Systems is they had done a lot of acquisitions. So they had all these sites in Europe. If I recall correct, maybe 40 sites or something crazy.
Okay.
And all these sites were having different firewalls, different network equipment, different servers, all that stuff. So I had made proposals, same thing. I had made proposals about how we standardize this. And if we standardize to similar platforms across these offices, this is what this will mean for the company, right? And so as a result of that, I became in charge of all of the European IT operations.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So moving to the US, what did you do when you came here?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, was there a new position, or what brought you?
Yeah. So I didn't really answer it. I told you how that job evolved, but basically then as a result of that, I started coming to the US a lot.
Okay.
And so the CIO at Wind River knew that I was interested in moving here. And they did look at me a little bit as a hacker. And they looked at me as somebody that could really understand security components of infrastructure and understand architecture because of all the standardizations I did. So what happened is Wind River was a publicly traded company, and they had quite a bit of problems with SOX and complying with SOX and figuring all that out. And they said, Steven, we think of you a little bit as a hacker and an architect, and you understand security, and KPMG is asking us all these questions about security, and we think you're the right guy. And I'm like, okay. And so we made a deal that I would come to the US for 6 months. We would try this out, because at this point I'm still, 25 years old or something, right? Like, let's try this out. Let's see how this goes. And if this all goes well for the next 6 months, then maybe we can talk about a relocation to the United States. So we did that. We did that for 6 months, and then we moved over, or I moved over to the United States.
Awesome. And then you worked for Moody's for a while.
Yeah. Yep.
How was that?
Well, that quite frankly sucked. That was, and that's
we all have to have those.
Yes. So I think my first experience with a job changing from my liking was Wind River.
Okay.
Wind River was fantastic, but the CIO left. The new CIO that came in, he was a Dutch guy, loved the guy, such a great mentor, learned so much from him. But he left as well. And then the new leadership that came in, I could just not see the connection.
Right.
We were just not thinking alike. Like one time I'm working on this big penetration test, which is basically a security audit of your network. And I have it all teed up and everything. And the CIO says, you know what? I'm overruling this, and we're going with this company because what the sales rep, he took me out to go golf. And I'm like, wow, that was your motivation to go do that?
Yeah.
I was like, okay. I'm like, I gotta go. I mean, we're not seeing an eye to eye here, right? I mean, like, we're trying to fix business problems, You want to go play golf with the guy? Go play politics. You know what I mean? Like it's like.
Yeah.
So I moved on. I moved on to Moody's, and Moody's. I learned quite a bit of things from Moody's. I was working in the credit rating department, Moody's KMV, which is basically really cool. What they do is they have a software, and back in the day, you would feed in a portfolio. So Bank of America, for example, would say, all right, here's our portfolio. We're feeding this into this analytical system. It would basically calculate for a week, and then it would spit out a risk rating. And that would allow Bank of America then to readjust their portfolio if they had to. That was really fantastic in that regard. It's very smart people, all PhDs, learned a lot from those guys. But the problem is Moody's was 130 years old at the time, a very big company, 5,000 employees or something like that. And it was moving really slow. Like, for example, they had gone through a whole bunch of acquisitions themselves. And again, I saw an opportunity to streamline things. I built this big proposal. In concept, the chief operating officer agreed on the proposal, but then it took 9 months without explanation, without logic, to get an approval. And then there were a few projects that I took and that I was working on where I was told like, hey, you're part of IT. You worry about IT, we'll worry about the rest. I was like, I just couldn't see it. You know, like that's not me. I'm like, let's work together to fix business problems. Let's work together to do this, or this. And if you tell me I can't question what we're doing there, then why am I here, right?
Yeah.
I'm just asking a question like, hey, why are we doing this? And they would tell me like, that's not your business. And
yeah, I see that at a lot of our clients. So, you know, I run an IT staffing company, and a lot of our clients that are huge, so much red tape.
Yes.
Behind what's going on, and so many politics involved. And just to get something done, sometimes just getting a person hired, getting a contractor hired.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to jump through hoops, and you know, that's sometimes you just got to. For me, I worked at a very large staffing firm before I moved to California. Some of the same things were going on there as far as this internal politics.
Yeah.
And kind of some of the same things that you and I have talked about in the past. I wanted to get away from all of those politics and just do what I love to do, which is solve problems for people.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, you know, what we kind of did here.
Yeah.
But right after that is when you went to Rimini Street.
Yeah.
How big was it when you started?
It was
How many people worked there?
Under 100 people. It was maybe 80 people.
Okay. And how much revenue?
A few $1 million, maybe $1.5 million, something like that.
And then today you guys are publicly traded. And how many people work at Rimini Street today?
We have about 1,400 full-time employees, and we do about $300 million in revenue.
Wow. That's inspiring. So tell us what Rimini Street does.
Sure. So Rimini Street, it's a support company. So we work with companies to manage their large enterprise software systems, right? These are Oracle and SAP systems. You can think manufacturing, supply chains, distribution, CRM, HR systems, right? Okay. And what we do is very disruptive. We actually replace the maintenance contract that these companies have with the vendor, and saving the companies 50% doing so, right? So potentially companies can save millions of dollars by switching to Rimini Street. And it allows them quite a bit of things. It allows them, it gets them better support, faster response times, but it also allows them to stay on these releases that they've been, because implementing such complex systems is not easy. It takes a lot of time for implementation, a lot of customizations. It can cost millions of dollars in implementation alone, right? And coming to Rimini Street allows these companies to really stay on those releases for a long time, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, right? We allow them to do that. And when you're with the big vendors, they try to have you upgrade all the time, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're like, oh, well, your product is end of life, so you want to go to the new version. Well, it's an HR system. What's in the new version compared to the old version?
Right.
Right? You're doing payroll, right? And so that's what is really our business model, and that's the value proposition for the companies or our clients.
So you and I talked about it before, but what excites you about the position you're in today and the company you're in today? What really excites you about where you're at?
Pretty much everything. And we are just up to our 15th year anniversary, and I had to think about this a little bit. And so I've been with the company for about 12 years. And a few things that really excite me about the company is the story. First of all, we are questioning the status quo. We are questioning the big software vendors, or we are challenging the big software vendors with how they're doing their support model, which is 99% profit or something crazy like that, right? Maybe a little bit lower, but in the high 90s, right? It's the David against Goliath kind of story, right? We are really challenging and we're really fighting that battle. We are changing the history as how enterprise software support works. And that really excites me to be part of that. Now, the company itself, I've always really felt at home. We are all technical people, very smart people there, and we are all very driven. And it's great to be part of that team. You know, my own leadership team, fantastic people, and we're constantly trying to fix business problems, trying to move forward, trying to keep growing the company. Like I said, we grew it from a few $1 million to 50 million to 100 to 300. And now we're going to keep going to 500 million, a billion and beyond, right? And so keep reinventing the company, because as you do that, you have to constantly reinvent. A company that's $10 million is not the same company that's $100 million. The same processes don't work, right? So solving those problems really excite me. What I also really enjoy about Rimini Street is the foundation. We started the foundation in 2015, and that's where we give back to the community. We've given back millions of dollars. We've given back thousands of hours.
What does the foundation do?
We are basically a charitable foundation, and we give to charities. We do two things. We give money grants, and we give employee time. So myself, for example, I've volunteered at food banks. I've sorted clothes in Vegas for kids that are basically homeless. I had no idea how many kids are actually homeless. It blew my mind.
Yeah.
That are basically couch surfing at best, and being able to help those kids or help those charities that are helping those kind of kids. Actually, right before COVID, I helped restore a building in Vegas for the Cupcake Girls. And the Cupcake Girls was a foundation that's basically focused on getting prostitutes out of that circuit. And the way they do that is by waiting in bathrooms with cupcakes and then having a conversation with those ladies and see how they can help and how they can maybe give a safe home and maybe change their situations.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I know. I remember when COVID did hit, you got yourself a 3D printer. You guys had like 3 of them, right?
Actually, we ended up with 10 people printing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So Rimini Street, it was all Rimini Street people, right?
Yeah.
So you guys were doing PPE? Was it the face shields?
Correct.
So printing face shields, 3D printing face shields. He also printed some other pretty good stuff too. But the face shields, I know there was also computers that were given out to schools.
Yeah.
So great company, and it's something inspiring for the rest of us to look up to.
Yep.
And it's one of the things, I know you're younger than me, but I look up to you as a friend, and one of my smarter friends that I can go, hey, what do you think about this? Because I'm at that point now where I'm trying to grow my company. And it's great to have people in your life who you can bounce stuff off of that have been there before. And to have mentors like that in your life, it's great to be able to walk up to somebody and go, hey, this is what I'm going through. What do you think about this? And you might already know the answer in your head, but sometimes you just need somebody else to come back and go,
exactly.
This is what I think. And then you go, okay, we'll put 2 and 2 together and go, okay, this is what I need to do. A lot of the stuff that we're doing in my company, the marketing, some of the other things that we're doing as a company right now came off of you and I being on a hike together.
Yeah.
And you said, hey, can I give you some constructive criticism? And that's always a loaded question. Like, oh God, do I want to hear constructive criticism? But, if you're smart enough to listen to it, the things that we're doing now as a company compared to 6 months ago when you and I had that conversation, it all takes off from there if you're smart enough to listen to it.
Yeah.
So what was the most notable event that changed your life? Career-wise, personal-wise?
That's a big question, man.
It's a big question. It's a big show.
I don't know. I think it's just what really changed my life. I think it's really been when I look career wise, it has been like we talked about just for the last half hour here. It's like sticking out your neck in situations where other people will be like, maybe, like, I'm not going to say anything. This is all messed up, but let's just do my thing and not worry about it, right?
Yeah.
In my personal life, I mean, obviously meeting my wife, that's for sure, right? Having my kids, I mean, that kind of stuff is definitely top of my mind.
Awesome. This is professionally. Is there a person that was the person who changed your trajectory the most? I mean, someone who's in your past as far as a business mentor, someone that stepped up that you look back on and go, thank God for this guy or girl being in my life.
Yeah. It's actually funny. And I realized as we were talking earlier, it's the second CIO at Wind River. His name was Frans, the Dutch guy that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And, man, he questioned me so much. He would have, in my one-on-ones, I would be saying, oh, here's what we're working on, here's what I'm doing. And he's like, but why? Why are we doing this? And he would always question me. He would really try to force me to think out of the box and think further and think longer, like more in distance, like what does this mean 3 years from now, right? How does this reshape Wind River? How does this change how we do business? How does he had all these things that really pieced it together. Some things that I already knew, some things I didn't know, but he really forced me to piece it all together and really connect the dots between all those things.
That's awesome. And I was just thinking while you were talking there, looking back to like when you were in school and you were asking teachers about things, or they were telling you about things and you're asking why.
Yeah.
This guy was almost doing the same thing to you.
Yeah.
And making you, question things and move on and make yourself a better technologist. Make yourself look into things a little bit farther than just because I said so.
Exactly, right? Yeah, and it was awesome because he made me really realize, he's like, okay, today we have a 1 megabit internet. Tomorrow that's going to be a gigabit.
Right.
And it's true, right? It's like, he's like, I'm right, he's right. It's like,
well, just imagine where we're going to be in a few years.
Oh man, it's like crazy, right?
Johnny's 2 years old right now, and he's on his iPad. He does everything on there. It's just like they've made it all so user friendly that a 2-year-old knows exactly what to do.
Yeah,
and it's absolutely it's a little bit exciting and frightening at the same time.
Yeah. Saves you hundreds of dollars on babysitters, though.
So tell me about your thoughts on how COVID has affected your business.
For us, it's interesting because we talked about our business model earlier, right? And again, so what we allow companies to do is to save money, the 50% off what they're already spending. They already have the system, they already have the spend. Coming to Rimini Street allows them to reduce that cost overnight, right? So COVID is in a way, just like we saw during the 2008 meltdown, is in a way a catalyst for us for increased business because companies want to save money, right? Companies they still want to keep innovating, but they want to keep their operating budgets low because we are in a known time. People are more conservative. Well, the Rimini Street is a very good value proposition for that.
Yeah. It was interesting for me to look at, we're an IT staffing company. So all of our clients quickly moved all their people to working remotely.
Yeah.
As you guys were one of the first. Because I was consulting with you on what are you guys doing right as soon as COVID hit, and it moved so quickly to a remote working sense. I did a blog about 3 months before COVID hit, and the research I was doing said that by 2024, over 50% of the people were going to be working remotely. I mean, look at it now. What is it? 75%.
But yeah,
it's a huge percentage now,
right?
And it's going to stay that way.
Oh yeah, it's we are seeing this also. We already had quite a bit of people working remote.
Yeah, you guys were already very forward thinking.
Exactly, because that was part of our business model. Is we hire the best of the best. And as a result of that, it means that we oftentimes hire consultants that have done these big enterprise system implementations, right? And so these people are consultants. So when they come to Rimini Street, they get off the roads and they get to work from home, and they don't have to be traveling like that. They get benefits, all that great stuff, right? So that's why we have so many people already remote, working out of their homes. But now the people that were in the offices, what we're seeing is these people are trying to stay at home. People are happy at home, right?
Right.
So it makes a question like, it's not just a question for us, it's a question for the whole world, right? But what do we do with all these offices, right? Are we reopening these offices? Are we maybe going more to a hotel booth kind of concept where you don't really have an office, but you can show up and you just pick a cubicle that's available?
Right.
So a big transformation there.
Yeah, it's been interesting. It's changed so much. I drove to Pleasanton the other day from out here in Brentwood, and it was 9:00 in the morning, and there was zero traffic the whole way.
Wow.
You know, and that's amazing.
Yeah.
Because before I started my company, I was driving to Pleasanton every day, and if I leave at 8:30 in the morning, I might get there by 10.
Yeah.
You know, and I was there in about 35 minutes.
Yeah.
The other day. So
that's amazing.
While, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, you know, all these different things that we're doing now, making the world better. There's so many negative things in the world, you know, just watch the politics that are going on in this nation and around the world. But there's so many positives that come out of the negatives. And I think we've both been lucky to see how our companies and our industry has changed for the better during all this crap. So my last question for you and for everybody else is, what is your true ambition in your career and your work life?
That's a big question.
It's a big question. It's a big show.
Yes. I think you said that before, John. What is my true ambition? I've just been always passionate about what I do. I've always been really enjoying, and I've been really enjoying solving problems, like solving the little puzzle pieces and then bringing it together, right? And what's interesting, somewhere in your podcast earlier was saying about how your mindset has shifted, about how it was all about you and how it's now not so much anymore. And I feel the same in a way, you know, when you're younger, it's very focused on moving forward and making more money, being more successful. Whereas as my ambition now has more shifted to giving back and really helping people in the community, helping people in my workplace, helping my direct reports. Like, for example, I've just been having all these meetings with my direct reports last week about, and I got 16 direct reports, so it's not a small task. So
right.
I basically was asking them, like, what drives you? What are your motivations? How can I help you being successful when you're at the end of your career and it's all said and done and you look back? What does success look like? So I can help them feed into that and really help them drive forward. And that's where I really find my ambitions these days. I feel like my ambitions have shifted over time.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's just I'm going through and reading 12 Rules for Life from Jordan Peterson. And one of the things in there that he talks about that is interesting, that it talks about that you have to have 1 foot firmly planted in steadiness, and then 1 foot firmly planted in a little bit of chaos. And right in the middle of those two things is where growth happens.
Nice.
You know, if you're just sitting there in your comfort zone, nothing's ever going to happen.
Yep.
But if you're over here in chaos completely, you're going to spin out of control. But if you're here in the middle, and that's kind of what I got out of what you said there, it's like you've got to have those two symbiotic things happening at the same time to have that growth. So, well, this has been great. This is, like I said, been our first ever podcast for True Ambition. So glad that my good friend, Steven Salaets.
I really appreciate it.
I really appreciate you being here. But maybe again in the future we'll do another one and we'll compare and go, God, we're just horrible.
We'll see, man.
But anyway, thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on True Ambition. I'm John Zink.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you.
The True Ambition podcast is brought to you by IT Avalon. For more information and links to other episodes, please visit www.trueambition.org. Now, go find your true ambition.